Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the MCEDC member meeting for the second quarter of 2017. I'm glad you could all join us today. For those of you who don't know me, I am Megan Hunter, the Executive Director of the EDC, and today we are broadcasting this in-person member meeting through a live webinar. I'm hopeful that all will go without a hitch, but thank you for those of you who are on the call and in person for your patience if we do have to work out any technical difficulties. For those of you who are on the line, you are muted, but you can ask questions or alert us to any difficulties with seeing the presentation by typing on the side. Robert is monitoring the screen. So firstly, I would like to thank Khazar Sheikh, one of our presenters today, for being our lead sponsor. He's with Mandelbaum Salzburg. He'll say a few words, but you do have some marketing material in front of you today from his firm. I would also like to recognize Maria Sheridan, who's with us today. Maria, there she is. Maria is the EDC chair this year. She's also the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Business Development for DM Airports, which is the Morristown Municipal Airport. You may have had an airplane fly over you today as you were coming here. It's always a thrill when that happens. Maria was recently recognized as one of the top 50 women in business by NJ Biz, and so we are very fortunate to have her on our and in the county. So today we have a number of truly expert speakers in the cybersecurity field. These individuals also represent part of our cybersecurity subcommittee and our technology committee within the EDC. We'll have in front of you the agenda. So in order of appearance today, we have Khazar Sheikh from Mandelbaum Salzburg, Tom Brennan with the OWASP Foundation, Jim Mottola with Sobel & Co., Jim Venezia from Phoenix Insurance Group, and Mark Perkins from ID Resolution. I will not be going through their biographies in detail, but please take the time to read them. Again, they're very impressive individuals. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the EDC or interested in membership or being on any of our committees, you can visit our website, which is morriscountyedc.org, or of course speak with me afterwards. I'd be glad to talk to you. So without further ado, Khazar.
Thank you, Megan. There you go. So thank you everybody for joining us here in person. Thank you everybody for joining us in the webinar. So as one thing that you'll see is that we are passionate about this area, right? And hopefully it comes out in our remarks. I'm going to take this off because it's bothering me. But we are passionate in our in what we do in cybersecurity and privacy. And each of us is going to be talking a little bit differently about the different areas that we kind of work on and what we do for companies and individuals and kind of protect them from a threat that we see all the time, right? No, we can't open up a newspaper or a magazine article today without data breach this, cyber that, you know, something is happening. We're seeing, you know, the debate right now with the FCC and the FTC and the FCC rollback with respect to privacy protections for the ISPs out there. And that debate is all nuanced. So depending on which side of the political aisle, you're either outraged at the coverage or you understand it and understand where the ISPs are coming from. But this is news that's in, these are issues that are in the news all the time. And so one of the things that we want to start with, when we talk about legal landscape for privacy and cybersecurity, is just start everybody on the same level and on the same page. Because as we talk about insurance, as we talk about identity theft resolution, as we talk about just some physical and technical safeguards that we actually put in your business, before we get to any of that, we have to start from a place as to why we're doing this, right? So a lot of people are scared about what's happening in cyber and privacy. A lot of people are worried about what can happen. But at the end of the day, the place where I start off from is that if it doesn't affect us financially, if we're not required to do it, and if it doesn't affect us reputationally, why are we paying attention to this? And so the first thing that we really have to figure out is the why. Why are we so concerned about some of these privacy and cyber issues? And it's not a good enough answer to say, look, you know what my IT guy said I should be, because it's not, right? Because some of the IT issues that we're going to confront and some of the IT issues we're going to realize it's not about IT, it's not about insurance, it's about risk. And so one of the first things that we want to talk about is what does that risk look like and where does it come from? Now, I know most people in the room and probably most people in the webinar are thinking, okay, let's get to the insurance guy, let's get to the IT guy, let's get to the former Secret Service agent, right? Because we're talking about cyber issues. What the heck does a lawyer have to do with any of this? Now, if you really believe that, I want to know, Because let's talk about that. Who in the room doesn't think that these cyber and privacy issues raise legal concerns for companies and individuals? There must be somebody in here that says, what the heck is a lawyer doing in this room, right? Jim Mottola, thank you. Thank you for being honest. Now, Jim and I are friends, and he still can't figure out why I'm doing, why I'm talking what I'm doing. So, but you're right. So these issues raise legal liability concerns, reputation and financial issues for companies and individuals. That's why, from a legal perspective, one of the things we're talking about is why are we obligated to do what we do around cyber and privacy. So when I think about cyber, it's not just about data security, right? So data security is about the storage of information. It's also about the sharing and transfer of information, but it doesn't cover collection, use, or disposal. And so when I think about privacy and cyber liability risks, it comes in the collection of data, the storage of data, the use, sharing, transfer, and disposal of information. It all fits into one of those 5 buckets. Now, the problem is when we drill in to what those 5 buckets actually are, and we think about where the legal obligations come from those 5 buckets, you can see that there are federal laws in place, there are state laws, there are international laws in place. For example, some companies outsource to India. Oh my goodness, what do your contracts look like, right? So whatever price difference you're getting from that outsourcing to India, how much risk are you taking on by doing that same thing by transferring it internationally? There are negligence issues that come up in these types of transactions. And then other sources like PCI, right, the payment cards industry for taking credit card information. Vendors may be pushing down contracts to your companies and say, you will do X, Y, and Z. Why do those clauses exist? What do those contracts look like? What are the requirements that they're making you do? And do you understand those requirements? So, for example, if somebody sends you a contract and says, you as a vendor, right, or you as a supplier must be 27,002 compliant. And you're like, well, I don't really understand what that means, but it's okay. I'll sign it. And if you're not compliant, well, you're in breach of that contract from day one. Now, the issues there is depending on how the contracts are worded, that could mean money out of your pocket. It could mean other kinds of issues that pop up if that contract is breached. It could mean injunctive relief, depending on how it actually is framed. So we have to worry about what kinds of contracts are we signing with other second parties, and then insurance, right? So insurance is a very, very complicated instrument. Jim will talk more about that. But depending on the claim language, the definitions and the exclusions that are in those policies, whether it's cyber insurance or D&O or E&O or CGL, you may be buying an insurance product that doesn't cover you for the risks that are most prevalent in your business. And so we have to worry about the obligations that we're under when we're looking at those insurance contracts as well, because those insurance companies might say, to get this preferred rate and to get this coverage, you have to do X, Y, and Z in that questionnaire that you get from them. All right, how are you filling out that questionnaire? Is everything that you're filling out accurate? Do you understand everything that you're saying in those questionnaires? It becomes very, very important because you could lose coverage that way. So as we look at federal law, the way that the United States system is set up, it's all industry-based. So GLBA, financial institutions, not just banks. HIPAA, obviously health. But when we talk about healthcare entities, who in the room thinks that that healthcare entities only have to worry about HIPAA? See, I knew we were with a smart group, right? Because you're right, healthcare entities, it's not just about HIPAA. It's also Federal Trade Commission Act type issues when you're dealing with healthcare organizations, depending on the kind of data that you're actually using and regulating. Gramm-Leach-Bliley. Who thinks that banks only have to worry about Gramm-Leach-Bliley? Again, very smart group, because you're absolutely right. You don't just have to worry about Gramm-Leach-Bliley. So even though the U.S., unlike some other countries, are set up in an industry-specific way, these laws overlap with one another, and depending on the data that you're actually collecting, using, sharing, transferring, disposing, different laws may apply. Now, on the state law, there are 47 different states with state data breach law. New Mexico is about to become the 48th. So when you're dealing with data breach response, there's a patchwork of laws. And one of the most interesting things that's coming out of the federal debates right now about the FCC and FTC is that it looks like there's not going to be a lot of action on the federal level, which means that the states are going to be even more robust in passing laws and privacy legislation, which means if you're a business that crosses state lines, you have to be aware of how those laws impact you. So let me make this simple for you. How much time do I have, by the way?
You have 13 seconds.
13 seconds, right? Like I said, Jim and I are friends, right? So he's always looking out for me. He's like, shut up already, right? So I'm gonna make this really simple. So this is a 5-point framework. If you follow this framework, you will be A-okay when it comes to cybersecurity. All right? Take a picture, write it down, whatever you want to do. Let's go through it. Make sure you're not vulnerable right now. So one of the things that you need to do is you need to talk to somebody like Tom, right? And the first thing that you do is to make sure that you are not vulnerable today. Because if you're vulnerable today, everything else doesn't matter. You need to make sure that you are closed up as tight as possible internally and externally before you move further. The second step, know the laws that apply to you and become compliant. So if there is a law like HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the FTC Act, state data breach laws, state privacy laws, negligence type issues, and you're not aware of what you need to do to become, as a minimum, compliant with these laws or follow these laws, nothing else matters, right? Because you can invest millions of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars into a system that protects you, and if a regulator comes in and says, well, what are you doing? And you're saying, well, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing to comply with the laws, but I invested $100,000 into the security system, they're not going to care, right? For them, it's about, are you following the law, and are you following those obligations? Number 3, institute internal governance controls, training, and policy and practice. So before you worry about anything else, worry about what you're doing internally. If there are things that you can move and shift to make sure your risk, your cyber risk, is minimized internally, that's the first thing you do. Number 4, I'm sorry?
Oh, it came from outside.
Oh, I see. Number 4, make sure your contracts don't increase and actually decrease your cyber risks. So once you figure out what you're doing internally, we want to push out that cyber risk as much as possible to our contractual partners. Now, the way we do this a lot of times is in the boilerplate provisions that we're seeing in those contracts, indemnification, limitations of loss, actual definitions when it comes to those contracts. We want that risk transferred out. If we're taking on too much risk because we're not paying attention to those provisions, what we're actually doing then is saying, look, you know what, yes, we're getting a great price in this contract, but the amount of risk that we're taking on through that contract may not justify the savings that we're actually getting. So looking at your contracts becomes very important. And then number 5, and Jim will talk about this, make sure you have the right insurance. So question, who in the room thinks that it's only about cyber insurance when it comes to cyber and privacy? Again, smart group, right? You're right. It's not just about privacy and cyber insurance, right? There are other insurances that play a role, whether it's computer crime, media, D&O coverage, right? And Jim will talk about the different kinds of insurance and how they kind of percolate into cyber. But when you're dealing with data issues, it's not just about cyber insurance, which traditionally has been about data breach response costs. But as Jim will talk about, the way that now policies are put together, if you identify the right risk, you can close that off with commercially available insurance, or you know what, you can manuscript those policies, right? Or if it can't be covered by insurance, well, there might be a legal effect of how to deal with that risk. But the number one issue is understanding the risk before you go out into the marketplace for insurance, so that the insurance you're buying actually covers you for those risks. So some recent hot issues that's gonna dovetail a little bit about what everybody else is talking about: privacy policies. So again, we'll ask the group. So when you set up your websites, who here in the room says to their website developer, just throw in a privacy policy, it's fine? Again, very smart group, right? Privacy policies are representations that you're making publicly. And so there is a legal effect that making sure those privacy policies are drafted the right way. If your website developer is saying, look, I'll throw this in for free, you're paying for what you're getting, right? And the issue with privacy policies is because they're representation, if you look at the most recent 6 FTC enforcement actions, they've all been around privacy policy disclosures. And what kind of disclosures are you making to consumers and users of your website? Are they accurate? Are they representative of what you're actually doing? So it becomes a very, very important piece and something that the regulators are paying attention to a lot. So if you have a website, you know, talk to the right attorney, right, and ask them, look, am I covered, right, by what I'm putting out there in the marketplace? Am I doing it the right way? Secure software practices. So Tom is going to talk about, security. And, as part of the OWASP Foundation, they're the world's largest group when you're dealing with application security. So we're going to listen to him intently. One of the things around secure software practices is it's the same thing as privacy policy. So regulators right now are also thinking about, are you doing the right thing when it comes to secure software practices? So when you upload your app, if you're putting your data into an application or a software program, is it written in a secure way? Because if it's not, one, there might be an exclusion around insurance. Two, it might cause you to be liable, for that data loss or for not giving those services the right way. And that's something that not only should you look and make sure your vendor is doing secure software practices, but again, in your contracts with them, you want to make sure that whatever they're doing around software is done in a way. So, for example, that captures, for example, the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. Or is it being tested against that? And those are really easy fixes to make sure you can sleep better at night. Contracts and the economic loss doctrine. Does anybody in the room know what the economic loss doctrine is? So this is something that only lawyers can love, obviously, right? So the economic loss doctrine is about when you're doing contracts, and specifically like a lot around business-to-business contracts. If it could have been in the contract or should have been in the contract, you can't claim later that the other party was negligent. And this becomes really, really important because we're starting to see cases right now where, there's a vendor relationship or a business-to-business transaction. Something goes wrong, data gets out there, the services are not provided, something breaks, and there is a negligence claim against that other party. Courts are starting to say, look, you know what? From a business-to-business perspective, this is an economic loss that should have been covered by your contract. Now, why does this become important for everybody in the room? When you're negotiating your contracts with your second parties, your vendors, your suppliers, your other businesses, and you're not thinking about asking the questions around privacy and cyber, you might be barred from arguing negligence later on. So that's where it becomes really, really important. So contracts are not just a throwaway thing that you just sign. They actually do affect your rights, and they affect your rights a great deal around this privacy and cyber area. Cyber insurance, Jim will talk about. The one takeaway here, again, is that when we're looking at insurance, it's amazing. It's a contract, right? So when we're looking at insurance, the most important things that I take a look at, the definitions and exclusions. And I'll give you an example. I was looking at a cyber policy a week ago, and the definition of claim in that specific policy was upon a litigation or a government inquiry. Well, you know what? The data breach happens months before that can actually happen. So this policy was written in such a way where there was actually no coverage whatsoever for data breach costs, even though the endorsement said data breach, coverage form. And so that becomes an issue for the insured because when I have that conversation with clients and suddenly they realize I'm not insured for this, they're not that happy because they've been paying premium all this time. So that's the one thing to look at from my perspective around cyber insurance is as you're looking at those definitions and those exclusions, make sure you're buying what you think you're buying. And then number 5, credit monitoring. Mark will talk a lot about credit monitoring, but from a legal perspective, and it's great, right? This is why it's interesting. Everything has a legal perspective and a component. Where the legal perspective and the component comes in for credit monitoring is that right now businesses, when they get a breach, the first thing you see in the mail, if you're a victim of one, or the first thing that people advise when you're a business is get credit monitoring. You know what? This company is offering you 2 years of credit monitoring services. Well, what the courts are saying now, and the reason why they do that is because the company can argue later on that there's actually no damages. If there's credit monitoring in place and credit restoration in place, even if there's an identity theft, how are you really damaged or harmed? So this is what's been saving companies from massive data breach lawsuits because the courts have been saying, hey, customer, you have no standing. You have no damages. You can't bring a lawsuit. But now it's a little bit overkill, right? So the courts have realized this is what's keeping the companies out of being responsible for some of their data issues. So courts are starting to say, well, you know what? If you offer credit monitoring after a breach, that's evidence that you think something could go wrong. So now you have standing plaintiff to bring a lawsuit. And there's some strategies, Mark, Nick, and I have talked about that, of how do we alleviate some of those issues. But the other issue on credit monitoring that's popping its head up is, let's say you're a victim of a data breach. One of the first things that you do is you offer credit monitoring. You pay for those credit monitoring services before the insurance carrier actually says okay. Is that covered? Typically,
Technically, no.
Technically, no, because it could be considered a voluntary payment, and those are typically excluded from those policies. So these kinds of issues do raise legal concerns, and you know the issue about raising legal concerns is only this: is that none of this operates in silos. So as we're listening to Tom, as we're listening to Mark and Jim and Jim talk about these issues, the one takeaway from all of this is an overarching, all of these things are connected, nothing works in silos, and you have to worry about how these things are connected together and what kind of liability and financial and reputational risks that can mean for your company. So I don't know if I have any other, I don't know if I have any more, zero time. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take it afterwards or as we go. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great, how you doing? So my name's Tom Brennan. In your program, a little bit of background on me, so you have that sort of covered. But my background comes both out of the physical side, from the Marine Corps, and then working in financial services, then having that organization be sold or acquired, and then working still in the technology space and still writing the software. I'm here today representing an organization known as OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. I'll touch on that and exactly why in a second, but let's just do a little video to get things going.
This is Billy. Billy is a polite young man who always says please and thank you. Studies hard.
Sorry, guys.
Should be loud enough.
This is Billy. Billy is a polite young man who always says please and thank you. Studies hard and treats others with respect. On the sports field and in the home, Billy understands the importance of doing the right thing. But Billy forgot something. He forgot to update the security software, OS, and web browser on his laptop, compromising his computer and making himself vulnerable to cyber criminals. That's not giving it the old college try, Billy. Now, consider the case of Jenny. Jenny loves the internet. She regularly broadcasts the minutiae of her daily life. And she shares detailed personal data about herself and her friends. And she doesn't hesitate to add anyone who tries to friend her. Do you think that makes Jenny popular?
Nothing like being Miss Popularity. Yeah.
And then there's Betty. Betty is an up-and-comer at a big downtown business firm. You can see by the orderly arrangement of her desk and her neat appearance that Betty is a hard worker who enjoys her job. What a shame, then, that Betty's attention to detail doesn't extend to safeguarding her company's corporate data. Last week, Betty opened a strange email. Now a remote access spam bot has targeted her company's servers with a denial of service attack. That'll cost the company millions. It's out on the street for you, Betty. What do Billy, Jenny, and Betty need to learn about using the internet securely and safely? Why, it's a simple question of thoughtfulness.
Why should I worry about being thoughtful? What will it get me? In this world, it's every man for himself.
Consider this. It only takes one lapse of security to grant hackers access to a network full of sensitive information. Maybe it's the private records of everyone at your school. Maybe it's a company's intellectual property. It could even be a matter of national security.
Everybody tells me to be more thoughtful. Well, I'd like to be more thoughtful. If I only knew what it meant.
Good question. Here are some simple things you can do to be a more thoughtful and safe digital citizen. So don't be a Billy, a Jenny, or a Betty. Follow these simple steps to ensure your online safety and the security of us all.
So sort of a public service announcement, right? So I don't think we do enough of this in our space. Can you just click on the slide itself? This works. There you go. Okay, so sort of the public service announcement from OWASP, right? So OWASP is a unique organization that I'm on the board of directors for worldwide. It's about 55,000 members. My day job is with Intel, different sort of life over there. But with OWASP, what I'm here to talk about today is relative to software security, which impacts all of us, right? So when we look at the ability to buy software or build software, we certainly still do not have sort of ingredients on the box. When people buy food, of course, you have that sort of concept. But as a business owner, you buy software or buy services, in some cases, you still don't even know what you're really getting, right? It's sort of like a billion-dollar yard sale. You buy software and you hope it works, which is actually interesting. But who trusts OWASP as an organization? A lot of people. The organization's been around now since 2001, right? It's got a global reach. We had our meeting last night that really focused on cybersecurity areas, and we dive deep on the technical side about how we would actually work and do some software security things. My point is that the information is useful that I'm going to steer you to in a moment. As we look at sort of the problem, right? The problem set is really simple. The problem set is really tied to predominantly a workforce issue, right? Predominantly. Many organizations simply don't have the people or the time that have the focus of being able to build your systems securely and maintain them. And we would probably agree that if we have a business that has multiple technologies, you may have experts in certain different products, but sometimes these products don't talk to each other, right? So some of the basic stuff is still sort of broken in our industry that we're dealing with. So again, tie back computer security, tie it back to the castle. Right? The data in the castle is the treasure, right? The data in your computer is the treasure. The data on your server is the treasure, right? Hackers, people that dress in black and wear hoodies, might be me, but we literally look for targets to go ahead and determine how vulnerable an organization may be to attack. And bad guys, again, it's all about ethics. Bad guys take data and either sell it or use it to go ahead and cause problems. Good guys, again, ethics, are doing the exact same thing. I always say when we compare teams and people, it's about motivation and ethics. It's not about skill. I have lots of great technical friends and myself in this category that will be happy to go ahead and go technical asset for technical asset with the baddest guy that's been locked up a federal president for 10 years. It comes down to ethics. So you have to be able to secure the assets that you have, and have the people on your team or third parties that can assist you in those areas. So since there is no magic button to press for data security, it's really an important concept to understand where you can find resources for your business and what we can do to help your business be better. So sort of if you look at Hacking 101, some of the information I want to pass along, again, based on the demographics and pretty much the sizes of some of the businesses associated with the chamber, you have to start looking at sort of basic compartmentalization, start looking at basic network design, start understanding what you're responsible for as it pertains to laws and regulations, because attackers look for simple targets. They look for simple targets that have wireless turned on in a public forum with inter-client communication, so that when you join the wireless network and you join the wireless network and he joins the wireless network, well, the guy in the back of the room can now hack all three of them, right? So the idea is being able to be aware as to what are you exposing your clients to and what are you actually giving access to for the people within your business. Do they need access to everything within the entire organization, or do they need access to certain systems that are maybe compartmentalized for their job function, right? In organizations that have probably more than 5 people, it's always fun to put something on the network that says payroll server, or a system that seems important. See who knocks on the door, or who tries to attack or to connect to it. The question would be, well, why? Why exactly is my customer services reps in this particular building connecting into this system at all or trying to access it? Because you put it out there, they're looking for it, they're bored, and that's how things happen. People stumble across it. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated attacker. But my point is, if you don't have an inventory of what you have, you don't even know where things are, if you don't have an asset diagram that you can go ahead and talk to somebody, when law enforcement steps in or a third party steps in, they sit down with you and they're trying to help you, well, you don't have simple things in place. You don't have diagrams. You don't have information documented, right? So in order to help the people that you want to work with and make sure you understand your business, so when people knock on your door and want to prosecute or want to hold you accountable, you can at least show due care. Really, really important stuff. Okay. Understand, of course, when you have a network like this, that a bad guy, let's put the bad guy hat on for a second, when I'm looking at a target and I'm trying to find a way into the target, sometimes getting into the target is as simple as buying a vulnerability that's been developed by a friend of mine for cash, right? Or perhaps it's looking at public-facing internet forums and determining, oh, you happen to have a big IP system that does load balancing on your network. wow, let me go ahead and download this executable, modify it, compile it, run it against the target, and I have access to it. In the world of what I do, it's that easy. Because it doesn't take a lot of skill to use other people's stuff and manipulate and maneuver it around. But it also takes a little bit of time to build some of these things as well. So you have the builders, guys that are focused on building the exploits, because they're doing that for different reasons. We'll show you one of mine in a moment. But then you have folks that are going to go ahead and use them, and they're going to take the data and use it for their own purposes. There's also very valid reasons to use some of these tools. Performance testing, testing your environment, seeing what it's sustainable for. So it's not like saying that everything's a bad exploit, right? Sometimes these are useful, and I'll explain one in a moment. So let's go ahead and create a hacker, right? We're going to show you how we create a hacker. So Robert's going to be my hacker. So Robert's going to go ahead, and he's going to jump over to a website that we have set up. And Robert, if you want to go ahead and click on the icon on the top left there. So Robert's looking at a live public-facing website, and it happens to sell a lot of stuff, right? So like an internet, like an Amazon type thing. And Robert likes to search for, I don't know, NBA. So he wants to look for some NBA gear for something he wants to buy. And now, here, Robert, this is a typical website. A hacker may decide to go ahead and send you an email. We've heard about the phishing attack. May go ahead and decide to send you an email to entice you to click on this great sale we're having for this great thing from the NBA. So what you're going to receive is going to be a link that's going to be at NBA.com, whatever the target website is that I've already, bad guy, I've already gone ahead and found this problem. I'm going to phish you with something that I want you to click on. Might be the new iPhone 8 that I'm going to send you for only $99 if you click here. So go ahead and drop in the payload. Hit go. And what that is, this is reflective cross-site scripting, which is tied to a document ID, or is referred to as a cookie. Now, the point here is the attacker, me, sending the email to Robert. He would have said, awesome, this is cool, basketball stuff, awesome, I'm in. Clicks on it. Goes to the legitimate website. What this does is it passes me this unique string, because it can fire it back to me, the bad guy, waiting at my house or waiting here or doing whatever I'm doing. Oh, look, I got a sucker. Now I log in as him, and I'm now in his account as him because of this particular unique ID number. I now can conduct activities as an individual and move forward. Again, one simple, easy-to-do sort of hack, and you say, well, that's interesting, but that's just one class of attack. You can go back to the other slide, please. Very hard to do live demos and webinars all at the same time and no keyboard, so roll with me. So the next thing here is, how do you actually learn about this? You can click on the OWASP link for me. I'm sorry I messed up our little rehearsed prezo before. If you go back to the OWASP website, there you go. Yeah. So OWASP as an organization has a lot of material, So for people that are interested in this sort of behavior, techniques, process, how this stuff works, it's all well documented, right? It's well documented in a way that we teach and educate and try to have people understand the threats, the risks, so they can protect themselves or their businesses against them. The same thing happens on both sides, though. It's kind of like having a gun. I'm a big shooter. I can give a gun to anybody in this room and teach you how to shoot really, really well. But if you have like a mental instability, you want to go kill your family, that's a whole different problem that I can't deal with, right? So the point of it is that OWASP has a lot of the resources that are used for technology advancement, and what you do with the technology advancement is sort of a double-edged sword. Let's go back to the other slides. And some people refer to these things as dual-use technologies, because you can use them for good or for evil. It just really depends, again, on what? Ethics. So when we look at all the web applications that are out there, and this is from Veracode, one of their slides, so thank you for them for the slide. But when you look at the industry verticals, I always hear the conversation of, well, how can I be better in security if I'm in the hospitality industry, or I'm in manufacturing, or I'm in government, or I'm in whatever industry it means? Who cares? Nobody like me cares what industry you're in. You might have certain items that are unique to your business. You might use Documentum for attorney document management. You may use SharePoint in a particular way for a particular business. You may do things that are unique to your business. But from a technologist perspective, you're just a target. You're just a number. You're another system that's going to be hacked because I'm going to be looking for the same approach and methodology pretty much every time to be successful. So when we look at that, let's go ahead and look at another example. So I wrote this tool and released this tool recently. And what this tool does, it does denial of service. So I'm one of the guys that writes exploits. So when we go ahead and look at that, I want to jump over to the next screen here and press play. You can go full screen if it's easier. So what we're going to demonstrate here is on my local machine, I'm going to stand up a web server, and I'm going to run a local web server to prove that the local machine is actually acting in a way that's allowing this to run. So here it is, it's running a locally Apache, it'll pop up. We have the tool over here that's running on the machine, just a Windows box. And here the user is bringing up the web page to prove that it's up and running. Pentest Apache Web Server, GitB, right, just a website. What we're going to be able to show here in illustration is we have connectivity coming in that we're watching through like a Wireshark or through a monitoring what's going across the wire. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and use the tool, and we're going to go ahead and target the tool to target this web server, and we're going to press a button. And when you press the button, originally I built this for the question of how many people can do online stock trading at once for the company I was working with. The answer was 20,000. Interesting. What happens when 20,001 happen? Well, it's only so many people can fit through the turnstile at the TSA line at the airport, right? It's called denial of service. People are trying to rush through the turnstile. But the point is, I've just proven that this web server was just knocked offline by this tool by pressing a button. Again, you can call it performance testing, performance improvement. You can call it, hey, it's a really bad hacker sitting in a coffee shop pressing a button at WikiLeaks.com, or pressing a button at your website, or pressing a button at an SSL VPN that you're working from home because there's 2 feet of snow outside, and you can't log on to your network at work. You can go back to the slides for me. Again, tools are tools, right? If you bring me to Home Depot, I'm going to go, wow, tools, screwdrivers, awesome. My wife will think I can fix something in the house. Wrong. I write checks, right? I don't know how to build anything. But the fun part is there's lots of great tools out there that are in the technology space, and what you want to be able to do is understand sort of what's there. What we did, Evan's in the background, he's my VP for OWASP, we actually built a virtual village. We built a virtual village for testing these things in sort of a live fire exercise area, letting people work on tools and test stuff out and play with some of the tools that are very common in our industry, both open source and commercial. But again, when you start looking at who's working on the solution to the problem, there's lots of people researching, looking at things. They have time to spend in a particular area. Not everyone's trying to sell things out there to everybody else, right? Some folks are just focused on the tech. So when you look at that and you tie it back to your business, I think it's important to understand there's about 20 areas of focus that Tony Sager, who used to run NSA Tau, who is now with the Center for Internet Security, myself and probably 30 other people, all worked together to create the Center for Internet Security Top 20, which was recently adopted by SANS as the SANS Top 20. Now, if you look at the top 20, and I run through just a couple of them really quick, and the slides will certainly be available with the demos, but if you want to look at some of the areas you can be better at, take this as a checklist. Take this and randomly go ahead and throw a dart at the wall and say, I don't know, number 16. Are you currently monitoring your accounts for new account creation, permission changes, access to sensitive data? Do you have a way to monitor that and measure that and report on that? If you don't, you have a problem. Because when I break in, you won't know it. Let's go to this one. 8. What are your current malware defenses? Being able to take code, compile it, giving it a new hash, launch it at a target, and then be able to infiltrate the target and be able to propagate within the environment is trivial with reading a few tech guides. The concept is if you can't go ahead and detect behavioral-based analysis within how your systems operate, you're going to fall victim to ransomware. It's a big thing on the streets that everyone's concerned about. Continuous vulnerability assessment. How do we stop systems from having problems? Well, what do you do in this space? All this stuff is a lot of work, right? So businesses go, stuff's way too expensive to go ahead and do this ourselves. How do we go ahead and make this work in an environment that may be smaller? Or I'm so small, why would I be a target? Well, it's interesting people say that because small businesses are the target, right? I do a lot of businesses with nonprofits in particular. So what we did is we said, so to see a lot of infiltration into the nonprofit organizations as jump points, right? Particularly for no IT staff, no access, systems that are old, not maintained. They're trying to do a mission, right? Saving puppy dogs, saving kids, whatever they're doing is great. But we're also a nonprofit. Oh, wow. So what do we have to offer these guys? We can't give them enough money, but we give them tech. So we started offering the opportunity to hack charities or hack other organizations, nonprofit to nonprofit, and say, hey guys, we went ahead and did this as a learning exercise. We conducted assessments of your public-facing perimeter and your internal perimeter, give you back a report, and here's how bad the problem is. Now, we can show you how to fix or correct this, right? OWASP, like each of the chapters, And I forgot to mention, we have 250 chapters in 110 countries. So we are taking it upon ourselves to try to make the world a better place as a collective. And if you go down to owas.org/index health check, or just go there, there's a little form you can fill out. And if you're looking for like sort of an assessment of what your public-facing presence looks like, you fill out the form, it gets poured over to a local chapter, and they're able to go ahead and help you understand what your security parameters are. So this is very, very useful. So again, I do a lot of different stuff with security, but I also want to highlight the last 2 items that you should be well aware. This morning in Chicago, we had a flight problem because of a computer glitch, which is being told is now a computer security problem, which is allowing access to systems to onboard things. Scary stuff, right? Well, Scottrade, if anyone here deals with Scottrade, well, they were just breached. 20,000 accounts today, right? So now your broker-dealer communication, your information that you use to trade stocks is there. And how do some people use that when they breach a financial services firm? It's a pump and dump, right? Have 10,000 accounts buy something, have 10,000 other accounts sell something, and be in the stream to make money, right? So there's ways to play games with that. What is most disturbing to me, with my background, is that on February 4th, 700,000 police officers in Police One, which is a forum for law enforcement, right, agencies, etc., names, addresses, family information, home addresses, leaked. I should say breached, not leaked. So when you start looking at the centrality analysis of what people do with that data, a lot of targeting exercises go on, right? Where do people cluster, where they live, what they do. So it becomes a very interesting situation when we talk about security. It's not about the computer, it's about the information. And whatever the information is can be used on both sides. So happy to answer any questions, but I can't overly underscore how important it is, I think, for the mission that we do as a nonprofit, as part of this group here in Morris County. And OWASP has some great resources. So I have nothing to sell you, except please take a look at owas.org and see if it can go ahead and help you in any way. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so Jim and I are going to cover a few topics, and I'm going to start in what I think is one of the more important parts of information security. I like to call information security because I think cybersecurity makes it sound like it's, wow, cyber, you know. It's pretty basic. It's information, right? Just because you can't touch it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think a lot of people conceptually have a problem with that. The information is tangible, it's an asset, it needs to be protected in a number of ways. And if you're going to have a data breach, it doesn't matter if the information that's stolen is either digital or if it's physical information. We live in a paper and digital world, and we have to address not only the paper, but also the boxes, these plastic things with all kinds of stuff in them that Tom can tell you about, that has all our information in it. So, you know, when I look at something, I look at safeguarding of the information and the information systems. Can someone just get up, go into your office, pick up your laptop, desktop, walk out with it, or your server? Clean desk, clear screen policies. These are really very rudimentary. If you ever walk into a bank, you're going to see on people's desks nothing, right? Most of the time, maybe a picture of the kids. If you walk into a business that processes mortgages, you're probably going to see piles of paper everywhere, okay? That's just the way it is. So you have to figure out how you're going to safeguard that information and those systems, because a number of data breaches are going to occur when people leave laptops in their cars and they're not encrypted, right? So now I've got a laptop, and you know, I know there's an attorney that works at Mandeville Southburg, and you know, I'm going to go out in that parking lot, and maybe I'm going to break into that car, and maybe I'm going to follow him to his lunch appointment, and I know he takes his laptop with him everywhere, and I'm going to go after that because I know there's a piece of sensitive information there. So I think we have to think about employee education and training. It's so critical that we have processes, we have people, and we have technology, and it all has to be integrated into a solution. And when it comes down to that, and in certain places, that you need to have employee education and training in order to be defensible, in order for you to satisfy requirements where you may not suffer as much commercial damages through litigation. You have to prove that your workforce has some employee education and training. Again, clear screen policies, password policies, very simple things. And for smaller businesses, and that's where I spend most of my time, in businesses that are anywhere from $1 million in revenue to $100 million, password policies are a big deal. Employees clicking on malicious sites, a big deal. Leaving doors open, leaving information out. These are things that people just don't do. For being in the federal government, working overseas, working in embassies, it's very different on what we do and how we protect information, because we always feel like someone's trying to steal that information. I think you should think about that for businesses as well, because that information is your asset, right? It's your secret sauce, it's your customer resource management, what have you. It's so critical to your business process. And once that information is stolen and you have time down and you can't talk to your clients and you can't conduct commerce, you really are now in this crisis management, this incident response. What am I going to do? How many phone calls have each one of us gotten in the last 2 weeks? Where do I buy Bitcoin? Right? Why would anybody want to buy Bitcoin?
Extortion.
Ransomware, right? How much is it worth? How much is it worth for me to just pay the ransom, get the data back, and get back up online? Well, there's a couple things. One is, have you backed up your data? Is your backup encrypted? Well, usually most businesses aren't backing up their own data. Is it encrypted by the bad guy? Sometimes it is. It's encrypted hopefully by you, yes. Can you get access to it? And how are we going to tell your customers or your clients, hey, look, your data's been compromised, so I'm not sure what you should do. But a lot of firms can't even get to that point. A lot of businesses can't spend what it takes to figure out if their information has actually left the environment. And that's a critical piece, because most states are going to require you to tell clients or tell information owners when their data has left. And that takes a lot of computer forensics. It gets very expensive. So, coming from the government, and Tom can attest to this as well, we always prepare for everything that could happen. Anything could go wrong. We had a play in the playbook. Not saying that play always went as scripted, but at least we were prepared. What I see with small to mid-sized businesses is they are not prepared. It's not going to happen to me. What do I care how much a breach costs when I'm not going to get breached? Good point, right? But that's not the position to take. So it's about crisis management, instant response, and continuity of operations. Right? You work in an accounting firm. It's April 6th. Wow. Could you imagine if something happened between now and April 15th? Cross your fingers. It has happened to accounting firms now, smaller firms that we hear about. What are they going to do? This is a constant problem, because all that information is rich. They're in crisis mode, but also people are processing information very quickly. They're trying to cut the deadlines, and when people cut their deadlines and they're trying to get to that point, they're going to be sloppy. They're not going to make that phone call. They're not going to take due care and maybe not click on that link or what have you. So it's about a continuity of business operations. How long can your business be out if you do not have access to your data? Who still has paper records here? Right? Good. Keep them. Don't get rid of them, because you might need them. I mean, really, if you're not backing up your data, I'm not saying break out a typewriter, but man, I know there's one in every office somewhere, because you need to have a backup plan. You need to think about that. And I really think it's important when you look at it. You have to have some sort of a business impact assessment, right? How much are you going to lose? Where's our data? How quickly can I get to it to get back up online, to get back in business, right? How much is that going to cost me? What's my downtime, right? What's my recovery time objective? You have to look and you have to establish, how much more is that going to cost over time, right? It's a critical point of it. What are the minimum resources I need to recover? What do I need to get back up and running? What's that backup? How long is that backup in there? Can we now manually serve our clients? Because we still have that capability to do that, if possible, right? Or do I have a partner business that I can help, that can help me? And I think that's, you have to, it's not a me versus you type of paradigm. You know, I tell a story about you've heard this, about the bear, right? There's a bear out there and there's two people standing there. One friend says to the other, hey, look, there's a bear. He goes, well, why are you putting your sneakers on for? You're not going to outrun the bear. He goes, not to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you, right? It's not a competitive advantage, you know, and I think that's the way you have to look at it. You have a partner firm, you have clients you work with, you know, I mean, for different partners, different firms you work with, maybe that's your backup. Maybe you rely on each other at some point in time to help you get through that business crisis. Again, prioritize the process and what is it going to take to get you back up and running? Superstorm Sandy comes, we lose electricity. Some people had it, some people didn't. Right? I'm sure there were businesses that shared space with each other. They came kind of ad hoc type of situations. Their employees could go home and maybe use the Wi-Fi at their home to serve their clients. But let me tell you something. After about a week, people stopped caring about New Jersey. And like, I'm in California, you got to help me out here. I have a client that needs X, Y, Z. So, you know, you have to think about how you recover. And again, quantitative, qualitative impact. How much does it actually cost you? But think about the reputational cost. You know, in Morristown, there's about 5 dry cleaners, right? So if one of those dry cleaners that I use, my credit card was used there, and I found out about it, you know what? I like those people, but not that much. I'm going to go to the next one, right? The barrier to entry, the barrier to move from one client to another is not that big of a deal. In certain industries, accounting, law, it's a little bit different. Insurance as well. So, you know, I think you have to look at, again, a process-driven approach from in response. Who am I going to notify? How are we going to tell our clients? Who's going to present that information? Who's going to talk to law enforcement? How is that going to be reported to our various stakeholders? If you're a larger business, you have different partners. How are you going to report that to them as well? Again, I think it's always about having a plan, right? We've got to have a plan, but you also need to have someone, I think, do an assessment. Okay, I'm a consultant, of course I'm going to say that. But I think for me, I have the opportunity to walk into businesses and to look at their policies and procedures. But let me tell you something, I also own the risk in my business. It is a very different feeling, okay? When you're looking at an insurance policy and it's your policy and you're thinking, oh my God, you mean we have to figure out that we got hacked in order for us to be covered? Well, we have no way to technologically to determine that. Because 9 times out of 10, a business is going to get a phone call from another business or from law enforcement, and they're going to tell them that they've been hacked. So now what? It's when you own the risk, you really have to jump into it, and you've got to understand that you can't do it yourself. It takes kind of like the group that we have up here. It takes all of us to help you out in different bits and pieces because it is very it's a very a technical field, so to speak, in each of our own specific areas of expertise. So this is my last slide, then I'll pass it over to Jim. But we all have risk, right? You've got to figure out how you're going to address the risk in your business. You can reduce it by taking measures, by doing employee training, by using certain technologies to help you. You can transfer the risk by using insurance. I'm not going to spend more to protect an asset than the asset's worth, right? That doesn't make any sense. So, but at some point, there's only so much I can do. Anything that's outside of my ability to protect, I need to find another solution. And insurance, really, cybersecurity insurance is that solution. I can accept it and say, you know what? So what? If we lose $10,000 a day, I can deal with that. Or you can avoid it. You know what? We're not going to process credit cards here. That's not something we're going to do. We're going to use a third-party provider. We'll never touch the number. That's fine. So I think you have to figure out, really, how are you going to do this? How are you going to basically address the risk? Look at the, you have to look at the return on investment for what you're going to spend and what you're going to get out of it. But the thing is, you have to do something. You just can't say, it's not going to happen to me. I worked in a small private investigative business for more than a year after I retired, and we had sensitive data. We had people's data who we were investigating, okay? There was 4 of us in the office. We had to come up with a solution to protect that information. The last thing I wanted to do was get on the phone and call one of our clients' husbands and say, sir, look, I'm sorry, but your data's been compromised. We've been investigating you on behalf of your wife. Whoa. Reputational risk? Oh, yeah, a big one. So we came up with a solution that worked for us. I had an IT provider. We used a loss prevention tool. We had some backups. We spent some money to protect this. We put a lot of our stuff on the cloud. We encrypted our hard drive. There were solutions that we could come up with, and there are vendors that can help businesses of every size, and I really truly believe that. And the Chamber has a number of them. So I'm going to pass it on to Jim next.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
I'm Jim Venezia from Phoenix Insurance Group. And I think I'd like to start by touching on some of the things that Jim said, and also help you to shift your thinking a little bit. If you lease real estate, it's very likely that your lawyers are looking at your contracts. You emphasize insurance and insurance for the value of your content and even the stream of income that the real estate is generating. Well, I'd submit to you that your information is probably worth much more than the real estate that you're leasing. And you probably put less emphasis into understanding insurance to address issues that arise because of that information, issues of data breach and other cyber risks. I'd also like to say that with the dry cleaner example, you're probably going to use the dry cleaner that has nicer housekeeping. And insurance is really your digital housekeeping for the moment that something goes wrong. Finally, insurance is also the playbook that Jim spoke of. And when it comes to specifically cyber risk insurance, which is a little bit of a misnomer, because it really should be termed, and some insurers started using these terms early on, and then it shifted to kind of this branded kind of cyber risk. It's really data breach and information security insurance, because cyber risk touches on much more than a data breach and much more than loss or disruption of your information flows. For instance, cyber risk can impact your property. And if we look at property insurance coverages, and I think a way to understand this data breach and information security insurance is to understand why it's not covered on all of your other policies. And simply put, on the property side, insurers over time have intended to insure physical damage to tangible property. And there's some argument whether data fits into that description of tangible property. Insurance companies, of course, have specialized endorsements, but when you're looking at these endorsements to insure cyber risk related to property, you have to look at the values, because many times these specialized endorsements have limited values. So you'd want to sync this up maybe with what we call a difference in conditions policy to address the cyber risk related to property that your traditional insurance program is not covering. On the general liability side, the intent of a commercial general liability policy is to ensure bodily injury and property damage to third parties. It's rare that digital data, other than mental anguish, is going to cause a physical injury. In addition, because there have been instances, general liability also covers what we call personal injury and advertising injury. There have been some instances early on where some of the personal injuries, the libel, the slander, the trespass, the defamation type coverages were actually attached to create some coverage. Insurance companies kind of supported this idea that we don't intend to cover any damages from data breach or cyber risk under general liability by adding information exclusions, data and information exclusions. Some businesses make products, and currently product recall insurance really doesn't have a cyber exclusion, but you need to be aware that if you have product liability coverage and you're a Wi-Fi connected product, the Internet of Things, read the policy. Every insurance policy is a little bit different. Finally, let's touch on your professional liability policies. Professional liability policies, particularly for tech professionals, will provide liability coverage for your errors and omissions that may cause a data breach. Now, some policies may have a reduction in coverage for that. Few policies exclude it. But the key is that these policies intend to provide liability coverage, your legal liability to others. A data breach causes more than liability, and the liability is much further down, and as I understand it, there are few true liability claims. Most of the claims are related to forensics, notifications, and other kind of things that you need to do to make sure that you maintain your reputation after a breach. Those things are not covered under an errors and omissions policy. They're purely, or professional liability policy, purely, again, liability. And you'll understand that more clearly when we briefly touch on the data breach and information security insurance coverage. Directors and officers policies are now going to typically have an exclusion because once insurance companies create a whole nother line of business and that line of business exists, the traditional policies are going to exclude exposures that can be better handled by a specific line of business, right? So your line of businesses, general liability, property, professional liability, data breach and information security, etc. You'll have these slides. They just address some of the expectations or not that you can have on other insurance coverages. One point of interest, an area where most of my clients will say to me, yeah, we had that happen, is trickery. I guess you also can call it phishing, where maybe the CEO or the CFO receives an email. It appears to be from the other party. For instance, if the CFO receives an email, it may appear to be from the CEO, and it says, please transfer X amount of dollars, I'm running out of the office, won't have time to have a conversation, need it wired to. And it's fake. Employee dishonesty and crime policies, computer crime, computer fraud, and funds transfer, they generally don't intend to cover trickery. So the policy or the coverage that you want to make sure is added to your crime coverage suite is socially engineered perils. And again, these are just some of the ancillary coverages related to cyber. Finally, let's talk about the coverage that you probably all want to hear about: data breach and information security liability insurance coverage, also known as cyber insurance, but again, more specifically called the former. The policy is made up of really two essential coverage parts. The first party coverage portion, which when we say first party, that's like how do you manage expenses related to, related to a data breach, and the liability portion of the policy, which is covering your liabilities related to privacy and data breaches and your liabilities related to network security or your firm's transmission of malware to other parties or your computers being used because you didn't secure your network to do a denial of service attack. So first party coverage and liability coverage. these slides kind of go into a little bit of detail on each one, but for instance, the liability coverages that you're going to see are the privacy coverage, the electronic media activities, and the network security liability coverage, the first party coverage, the asset protection and business interruption, business income coverage, the data breach fund, regulatory fines. Let me ask you a question. I think I have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything specific that you wanted to get out of this conversation on data breach and information security insurance? I'll take like 2 now. I think we could address 2 people's questions now. Yes?
When it comes to policies, is it one size fits all based on the size of the organization, or do you somehow qualify the operation through some sort of metric?
That's a great question. So for smaller and even small middle market businesses, the underwriting tools now, the applications have been simplified, and the underwriting looks at kind of the industry, because it's rare that a client, when we say, how many records do you have, right? How many records of information do you have? Most clients don't know that. So the underwriters are starting to use some formulas between revenue and the industry you're in to develop pricing. Those policies tend to be a little more one size fits all, and the coverages that are where there's less of an exposure, like maybe the business income, because most people have backup, people will say, well, how about I delete this coverage part? How much can I save? It's probably not going to be that much. It's going to be insignificant. So typically we'll sell that as a full suite of coverages. Insurance companies do have endorsements, though, and it's important for your broker to understand your specific business, because maybe we're going to put on an endorsement that's relevant to your business that maybe isn't relevant to, say, Jim's business or Mark's business. Now, larger middle market companies, you'll have a little bit of leverage. And the space that I work in, I'm very frequently working with underwriters to manuscript endorsement and to really tailor coverage to specifically meet client needs. So in the larger middle market and the large company market, yes, this is not one size fits all, and you can really structure the policy the way you want it. Along those lines, an important consideration is, are you going to use the insurance company's panel of providers, or do you work with Kazar? Do you work with Tom? Do you work with Jim or Mark? And you prefer that your team handles the claim. There's an opportunity to have that done too. Now, often policies will have a lower limit if your team handles the claim. So if you're a middle market, large middle market, or a large company, you can probably negotiate that limit to where you want it to be and have that coverage structure to really be tailored for you. Oh, that's interesting. I guess there's a diagram that hopefully will show up in your those two. Okay, people talk about the exclusions, and the exclusions, of course, are very important. In general, the exclusions are intentional acts, things that you've known, things that are better insured on another type of insurance policy. So that leads me to always focus on the application, because you don't want coverage denied because of misrepresentations on your insurance application. And you can see by the conversation that's been going on up to this point, there's a lot of people in an organization that touch on what's happening to that organization's data. When you're filling out these applications, there's a financial component. Get your CFO involved. There's an HR component. Get your HR lead involved. There's a legal component. I love when my clients get their attorneys involved, whether they're outside counsel or in-house counsel. I think that that's critical, particularly when it comes to supplier exposures, right? Supplier risk management. That can be really big in terms of data breach exposures. And finally, make sure the technology team is involved. The application will touch on all of these areas, and I can assure you that no single person on that list understands each area. And if you screw up on the application, you might find that at the same time, your coverage has been jeopardized. That's it. I'll turn it over to Mark Perkins.
Well, thanks very much. I'm going to squeeze in my 15 minutes here. So we're going to be continuing a theme here, which is that to look at this whole business, you need to take a holistic approach to it. Not one of these components can you really think about in isolation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak about the impact that most individuals feel when they hear about a data breach of some description. How does that impact me? What does that mean, and particularly with regards to identity theft? And so this is pitched at the individual through the corporation, and the individual being the individual. So, okay, so are people worried about this? Only a few years ago, we used to think about, you know, a data breach and cyber information and hacking and our personal situation, and that was thought of as very, very geeky. That is absolutely not the case. And if you think people aren't thinking about this, this is Travelers Insurance Company. They do a risk survey every year. It's not about insurance. They go out to 3,000 or 4,000 policyholders and they say to them, hey, what worries you about what's going on in your life? So unsurprisingly, number one comes in financial concerns and risks. Actually, surprisingly, numbers 2 and 3 above personal safety concerns and risks. And I'm sorry if this looks a bit small to you. This is the left-hand chart. And number 2 is personal privacy loss and identity theft. 60% of respondents worried about that. Cyber computer technology data breaches risk 57%. And as I say, this comes in ahead of personal safety concerns. So Joe Public is very, very knowledgeable, very, very understanding of the risk they're running, and very, very concerned about what is going on with identity theft. And you can see the growth in here as well. In 1 year, a 50% growth in people worried about having their bank accounts hacked or fraudulently misused. Something I just want to very briefly touch on here as well, 60% offline identity theft. So when you're looking at all of these components in terms of, for example, cyber insurance, a paper data breach is just going to be as costly and is covered under the law in the same way that some kind of cyber attack is. So don't think that paper is gone. Unfortunately, this is the truth. So we need to build up all these barriers, the castle, the moat, the everything else we can do. But for the first time last year, the Federal Trade Commission, which is the government body responsible for monitoring identity theft complaints, acknowledged, as most Americans know, we live in an age when it's not a matter of if, but when you're going to become a victim of identity theft. This is going to happen to you. And similarly, we're talking about big business, small business. I think Jim was talking about whether you're a 1 million business, 100 million business, whether you're the pizza delivery guy. Identity thieves, bad guys, they don't care. They just want to take information, reformat it to either do damage to you or to create false identities to go and enrich themselves. So demographics, we don't care how old you are, we don't care your ethnicity, we don't care if you're rich or poor, we just want that information. Very briefly, touching across some of the areas that identity theft impacted in 2016. So first of all, 16 million people were victims of this. This number grew by 1 million year over year, so this isn't going away. Similarly, in financial costs, identity fraud cost $16 billion. This does not take into any account some of the things that were touched on earlier. For example, if you're a public corporation and your stock price gets whacked, very recently, of course, we saw this happen with the Verizon takeover of Yahoo, where the big Yahoo breach happened, and of course the value of the company was written down by another $500 million in the deal that went through. And then you also have the issue of reputational risk. Are you a business looking after my information properly? Am I going to come back and trust you if that's not the case? So, very big situation. Identity thieves move quickly. The minute we try to secure something, they find the next vulnerability. So, credit card transactions where the card wasn't present, last year that increased 40%, primarily because with the introduction of PIN and chip credit cards, it was much harder for identity thieves to commit crimes at point of sale. So obviously they go, okay, let's do it offline then. Instead, we'll move back to the other ways and get more sophisticated about using your cards when you're not there. Unsurprisingly, digitally connected customers and consumers are 30% more at risk to fraud. Makes sense, right? The more we do online, the more vulnerabilities we have. I'm going to talk about that more. Data breaches. 40% increase in data breaches in the United States alone in 2016. A little bit scarily behind that number is the fact that there were a lot of data breaches where the number of records, the number of people affected were just not known. So data breaches can happen, and your information can be at risk for months or years. This is not something that just kind of comes out, gets acknowledged, gets dealt with, and away we go. 50 to 59-year-old demographic is the largest complainant group to the FTC. They're very, very wealthy. I'm going to touch on that later on, so it's really not surprising there. Michigan is the state with the highest incidences of identity theft per 100,000 of population, and Hawaii is the lowest.
Yes, I mean, Mark, why Michigan?
It's just the way that the fraud incidents were happening there. Actually, a lot of it is because Michigan is a poorer state. You look at Detroit and some of the bigger cities, and so there are just more criminal activities in Michigan, I hate to say. Tax and wage fraud was was the largest complainant to the FTC. People filing false tax returns, using other people's social security numbers to forcibly gain tax benefits, etc., etc. Medical identity theft. I'm going to touch on this again a little later, but it is one of the three fastest growing areas within the identity theft arena. And the problem with medical identity theft is that unlike a credit card issue that you have with a company, you go to your bank, my credit card was misused, you're only liable for a certain amount, if at all. Medical identity theft is absolutely not the case. And the average out-of-pocket expenses in resolving the fraud, which could be legal, etc., was $13,500. Yeah, $13,500. We're talking about big money. You have this infographic, so it's there. Again, this is only meant to demonstrate the fact that there is no industry silo that is immune. It's just data. It doesn't matter which particular area we're in. So we've got the Target data breach, 80 million, Home Depot, 60 million, JP Morgan, 76 million, Anthem Medical, the government itself with the Office of Personnel Management, 21 million people, and a county community college in Arizona, 2.4 million people, believe it or not. So you've got big box retailers, banks, medical institutions, the government itself, and educational institutions there. And talking about it, we saw a lot of very big names there, but something to take home here if you are a small business. There's a small company called Natural Provisions in Vermont that only had 3 grocery stores. They got fined $30,000 by the Attorney General of Vermont for failure to comply with data breach notice laws. They were hacked, the credit card information got out, it was misused. Of course, they didn't know about it, but this was unacceptable. The company said it was unaware of regulations required by the Vermont Security Breach Notice Act. It didn't have an IT person on its staff. You know, this is just not going to stand up unless you've got a great lawyer like Kazara who's going to fight your corner for you. So it's a problem. If you're small, you need to understand these things. So I said about the 3 fastest growing identity theft areas. So number 1 is medical. We're waiting for some more statistics, but there were 2.3 million, but 500,000 in 2014 alone. It takes a long time to discover medical identity fraud because it's not as monitored in the way that we look at our credit card accounts, etc. Does everybody here go online and view their medical records every day, every week to see whether they're up to date, whether they're factual or whatever? It's a problem. So it takes a long time to discover the fraud. Your medical record is probably your most complete record, and it's very, very valuable to identity thieves. It sells on the black market for approximately 50 to 60 times that of a straightforward social security number, and can create incredible damage to you, not just financially, as I demonstrated, but actually physically. Somebody steals your medical insurance number, has a procedure done, now you've got a medically mixed record. Your allergies are not going to show up. Past treatments you've had are not going to show up. Your medical record is not going to be you, even though the social security number, the name, potentially the bill is going to be yours, but it's somebody else. So it's really scary. Students and minors. So why is this such an issue? Well, it's a big issue because when you think about it, right, from the day we're born till 18 years of age, parents here, I'm sure, you know, when do you use your kid's social security number? It's for going to the dentist, it's going to the doctor, it's everyday kind of use. What I guarantee you're never looking at for a 7 or 8 year old child of yours is, do they have any financial record? Do they have a credit file? Under the age of 18, you cannot borrow money. You can go to work, you can file taxes, you can open a bank account. You cannot borrow money. We have had instances, and therefore you have this 18-year void where there's kind of a black hole around the financial situation of the child. And we've had instances with 6 and 7 year olds owing, hundreds of $1,000s of debt, and 12-year-old we had bankrupted. This was actually because the family had bad credit, stole the kid's number, ran up tons of debt, and boom, problem. So if you have children, you need to understand there's a void there that you need to look at. And of course, then they're young people, they're very trusting, they share their PINs and passwords with everybody, they're on every social media platform imaginable, and they're just not growing up enough to understand the risks that they're running. It's a very big problem. And then last but not least, seniors. Obviously, we're in a baby boomer society, we're in an aging demographic. They are the largest complainant to the FTC about identity theft. They own over half of all the financial assets in America, so they're very, very prime targets for identity thieves, for financial fraud. And they're using more and more technology without necessarily understanding the risks. A lot of, grandma, grandpa, they're online, they're on Facebook, they want to keep in touch with the grandchildren in far-flung places. They're chit-chatting, they're accepting friends. They didn't realize they'd accept friends. They're giving out information about where they go, what they do. So there are big, big risks there. Something that I want to touch on briefly, but this is crucial to identity theft and us as individuals, right? So now 77% of American adults have a smartphone. Because of the information we have on our smartphone, right? It could be pictures that can't be replaced. It could be a list of all of our passwords. Hopefully, God knows nobody's done that on there. But things you have in your notes, you could have financial spreadsheets in there, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we place an average value of $14,000 on how we would have to replace our smartphone in terms of replacing that information. 80% of smartphones are used for a combination of business and personal. That throws up two issues, security and legal. Is your company allowed to look at your personal information if you're using that device for work, and vice versa? So there are issues around that. Crazily, over a third of people have no security password at all on their device. It's completely unprotected, and are often using unsecured network access. If you sit out in the lobby here, you'll see that you can get free Wi-Fi, but there's no little padlock on the top there. And as the techie guys, or Tom will tell you especially, there are people scanning that network to see which IP addresses are contacting it and trying to come through to you and to steal that information. And last but not least on this, 5.5 million smartphones were stolen in 2014. 1.4 million were never recovered. Well, if you think about that $14,000 worth of information on there, if you think that a third of them have no security on that phone at all, just imagine the amount of data that's there for an identity thief to pick up when he picks up that phone. This slide may seem very, very simple, but we often get asked when we're out and about, and I'm sure the tech guys do, what's the latest, greatest, antivirus, anti-malware, anti-keylogging software I can get? And we say, well, obviously you need to protect that. But hey, what about passwords here? Who uses the same password for multiple platforms? A recent study, 11 million passwords, 10% of users employ the 20 most popular passwords. So simple maths, right? Fewer than 1 in 20 tries, you're going to get into 1 in 10 accounts. It's insane. The top password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So develop good personal habits. These follow through into your business habits. They follow through then into suggestions to the company. This is real stuff. This is how identity theft happens. A lot of time it's stupidity, and we just don't do common sense things. Shits and giggles, there's the top 20. I won't. I got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to be quick here. I love this chart. Why? These days, this is the way our PII, our personally identifiable information, is made up. In the old days, our PII was all paper: driving license, passport, social security number. We probably had most of that stuff locked away in a safe somewhere. These days, not only do we have those paper records, but because of the multiplicity of ways that we're out there in the digital world, be that social media platforms, online banking, online shopping, geolocation. We take a photo, I'm away on vacation with the kids at the beach. It sends up, oh, this was taken in Florida. That's great. Identity thief now knows your home is not going to be occupied for 2 weeks because you're on vacation. The whole family's down there. We need to look at all of these individual components and understand for ourselves where are we vulnerable, because these are things we can do something about. Identity thieves are not concerned about, they feel bad guys for doing it. You've got to protect yourself, and this is a very useful chart. I'm sorry I'm flying through here, but we could talk about this stuff for hours. One thing, so what do? How should you figure this into your plan is, you should think about identity theft as something that is going to happen, and if it does, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it as an individual? What are you going to do about it as a corporation? You can spend a ton of time figuring out how to self-remediate these issues as well. We don't have any magic pixie dust we spread over this issue. You could find a way to do it, but it takes between 100 and 200 hours. And the last thing I want to touch on is something that was said about credit monitoring. We hear a lot in data breaches about, okay, you're going to get credit monitoring, and a lot of people here, I'm sure, have bought LifeLock or similar type products. Well, it's the usual thing, right? Watch the health warning. Not everything is the same. There's single bureau credit monitoring. There's a single bureau credit report. There's triple bureau. There is, more importantly, cyber monitoring, PII monitoring that you should have as a component of that. Because the three credit bureaus, you would think, right, even though they have different metrics for assigning you a credit score, they don't talk to each other the way you think that they do. They have to ultimately, but there's a time lag with things appearing on different credit reports, and therefore if you have a credit report that this card dealer uses and this card dealer doesn't, you're going to have a different outcome, a different score, different risks. So when we're talking about monitoring tools and monitoring products, they are not all the same, and you need to understand the differences in there. And I just squeezed in, so thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. Do you guys have any questions? There's a lot of information. Okay, well, this will be, eventually we will post this on the website. We've recorded it, and all the slides will be up as well. All right, so thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like